Welcome everybody. This is our presentation this afternoon on facility federation. We have Andy Rayner here, who's the CTO of Nevion, a division of Sony now, and he's going to be taking us through this really interesting topic. So take it away, Andy.
Thank you, Wes. Good to be with you this afternoon. Hope you're surviving the show. I'm already feeling like it's day 4, even though we're only a day and a half through. So as Wes said, or hinted at, I'm part of Nevion. I'm based in the UK. These are my contact details. If you want to reach out to me after the show, do feel free to do so. Okay, so I'm just going to give like a 2-minute overview of what content producers are actually trying to do, because that's where we derive the benefit of what we're actually trying to achieve by the facility federation that I'm talking to you about. So there are, in a very, very, very simple way, there are 2 key things people want to do. They want to increase the production value and reduce the cost. Those seems to be the 2 fundamentals. If we want to expand that very slightly, flexibility is what we're looking. So flexibility to increase production value and hopefully reduce cost. But alongside that, one thing that's very important that people want is the always on, the high availability. So those are kind of the prerequisites, the things that need to come together. Now this is a go-to picture of mine that I'm using in pretty well every presentation, because I think it catches, in terms of what we're talking about, the live production chain, everything we want to do. So we've got the management layer at the top, but fundamentally all of the other elements of the current and emerging live production chain are here. So what we're looking at doing is actually having acquisition at a location, potentially acquisition elsewhere, the traditional central facility, potentially acquisition via 5G wireless as well, potentially, and this isn't over here, and I'm just going to move too far out of camera view there. Over on the right hand side where it says home, that's like true domestic home control, such as has been used a lot within the pandemic. And in the middle there, where we're heading to as an industry, either private or public cloud infrastructure, which is actually hosting a lot of the data storage and processing. So that's the overall, if you like, very, very high level view, and we're going to now look at how that fits in. But before we do that, just talk about the advantage, because I don't know if any of you were involved in the early deployments of IP facilities, but the cost value analysis of just swapping out SDI cables for IP infrastructure is marginal, to say the least, possibly negative. So there is zero cost benefit if you're just trying to do that, even though obviously going to IP gives you some inherent advantages, like you're format agnostic, and you can do many, many more things like that. But these are the 3 areas that actually are where savings can be really incurred. One is the sharing of real estate, one is the sharing of equipment, and when I say equipment, that's traditional equipment and software, hosting equipment, and the sharing of people, the people resources. That's arguably the biggest sharing resource. So if we can have a distributed production area, just going back to that previous slide for 1 second, this one here, where actually all of these locations can be seamlessly joined up, then we actually start to leverage those benefits, and that's when we get the genuine cost saving that we're looking for, as well as the flexibility to actually use the best of breed of everything in this picture. So a little bit of a journey on the flexibility to IP production. We've had IP WAN infrastructure for 20 years now, and in my previous role in BT, I was significantly involved in architecting IP WAN infrastructure. IP facility infrastructure, I guess we've been doing for about 7 years now, and that, again, these are leveraging, I'm not going to go through all these bullet points, they're leveraging the ubiquity, they're leveraging the IP and IT industry. Where we're talking about now, in what I'm talking about today, is this complete IP end-to-end, because we've not only got IP facilities, we've got IP connectivity, and they're joined up. And it's that joined up piece that we're going to be looking at in terms of the way we've approached that and the way we can approach it moving forwards. The bit at the end is when we actually move to an entirely virtual environment, but we won't go through that on this element. I've got another diagram coming up in a minute. I'm going to show you, but you saw these pictures in the previous slide, but we've got many different locations. So you've got acquisition, storage and processing, and control locations in different places. So if I just skip through this slide to here, there was some excellent work the DPP did last year that I was privileged to be part of in spring last year, looking at different models of the way distributed production is happening now and in the future. And we've added a couple of models of our own to the classic 5 that the DPP came up with. Basically, what these are doing is showing which elements are co-located and which are remote from each other. And to be honest, the only challenge that we have with any of these is the speed of light in fiber. That's the one limiting factor. And I would say that a lot of the latencies that are being talked about are elsewhere in systems are actually unnecessary latencies. So the only non-negotiable latency in any ecosystem is the speed of light. Pretty well everything else we can actually optimize, and I believe within the industry there's a lot more optimization can be done on latency, especially as we move into software solutions where there's a lot of buffering is done intentionally to make life straightforward. So these are the models. You'll be very aware of the ST21 toolkit. I've been part of the journey of helping to evolve these, as has many other people that have been speaking here over this week. One or two things that came in relatively recently compared with the original spec. One is this -22 compressed video. If we're doing distributed production, then cost of transit of wide area networking can be a challenge, especially if we're talking about ultra high definition. So this approach, we're currently using a lot of JPEG XS, mapping it via 2022. So we leverage the same benefit of 2110, but we're actually using compressed video essence as opposed to the traditional uncompressed video essence. And then, of course, all the control suite. And what I want to bring our attention to in just a couple of minutes' time is looking at the challenges of the control over wide area, but we'll come to that. So thinking about what people want to do in a multi-location environment, there's what might be seen as potentially conflicting requirements. We actually have each location in a multi-location environment needs to have full autonomy. So one of the key requirements that we've had from users many times reiterated is that every location needs to be able to run autonomously and independently. It needs to be resilient, but at the same time, we want to be able to do the most plug and play sharing capability we can between locations. So we've got this autonomy and this full sharing capability. So this is where I'm going to just talk to you very briefly about 2 deployments that we've done in the last couple of years, which actually address these in different ways. They're both European-centric examples. This one is basically what we call a private cloud production. So if you think about that picture of the savings of real estate and the savings of equipment, the concept here is you've got, I think, 12 European countries, all of what I would think you would traditionally think as a thin client. So they don't have much infrastructure in those individual countries. And what we've done is they have actually got co-located in 2 data centers in 2 diverse countries, but interconnected, and I'll come to the interconnect in a minute, all of the processing infrastructure. So all of the local video is uncompressed, but going via the wide area network between international connectivity is compressed. Also, if you remember what I talked about, the autonomy versus the sharing, this is important. This arrow is actually a bidirectional arrow because there's effectively a fully autonomous, resilient, clustered control system here that can actually serve everything. There's a fully autonomous, resilient cluster here that can control everything. But those control systems talk to each other via secure API, which means you can actually have the sharing of resources between the centers, even though they are actually fully capable of serving things independently. So that's the fundamental, if you like, very high level infrastructure. A little bit more detail now of the breakdown here. What we have, so I alluded to even though it's an international connectivity, it's essence based. So we're using 2110-22 compressed essence to transit all of the video internationally, and the uncompressed -30 audio to transit there. And then we can actually make use of resilient infrastructure in the wide area as well as the local area. And fundamentally, these two hubs, again, are sharing information, can share resources, can dynamically share stuff because of the arbitration and the federation of the two control systems that exist there. Another example in another European country is this one here. And this started off as an IP facility infrastructure, and now is actually interconnecting IP facility infrastructures right across the country. So again, each of those facilities was required to be autonomous, resilient in its own right, and secure. Yet they wanted sharing, and that this is the important bit of how we actually share those resources in that secure way. Another breakdown just to show you some idea of the complexity. Apologies if that picture doesn't come out too well. So looking at the federation and the control plane. So typically what we do in a cluster architecture for control is we have at least 3 nodes, usually an odd number of nodes, and 3 is the minimum. These could be physically appliance-based, or they could be actually cloud-hosted, but typically for resilience and security, a lot of deployments currently are actually on location-based, on servers. And what we need to do is have these systems that can actually work fully autonomously, yet secure APIs that allow the resource sharing and of all of the different elements between everything under control here with the other elements there. And you don't necessarily also want to share everything. So it's important that you can constrain the elements that you share. And I'm going to talk about that from a standards perspective in just 1 minute. I think I can jump this slide because it's slightly redundant, so we'll jump through there. There's some work which we've been doing in VSF over the last couple of years, of which the first phase is just coming to conclusion, on looking from a standards perspective about how we actually arbitrate the sharing both of the media flows and of the relevant control information. And interestingly, we started with the media flows, and actually that was the easy bit, because actually sharing the media flows, you need to do things like address translation, you want to do various forms of protection, which may in a wide area include things like FEC. You may want to do encryption. There's a whole lot of things you may want to do to the media flows themselves, but that's relatively straightforward. The challenge is the control base, because again, the very clear voice of customer, whether this was a cloud infrastructure or a campus or just an OB truck at the other end, is those entities need to actually maintain security and autonomous running whilst doing controlled sharing. So the work we did in the 2110 in the control plane here, you've got this the data plane here, so we've got those things I talked about there that we maybe it's a toolkit of options for how we actually protect the data in the data plane. We actually have used a subset of the NMOS toolkit to actually allow us to actually do secure advertisement and acceptance of the resources between the locations. So there's a pre-agreed sharing, so the constraints on which devices and which resources are being shared is negotiated. So we have some elements that you'll be familiar with if you saw Jed's presentation just now. Some of the elements of NMOS. We're using it in a constrained manner here, but we're actually leveraging the benefit of all of that work that's gone before us. Okay, that's a very quick summary of a couple of examples of federation and what we need to do in the signal plane, the data plane, and the control plane. Hopefully that's been of some value. I'm very willing to expand on those if you would like me to, either immediately after this, or do feel free to reach out to me, drop me an email or ring me up, or come and find me on the Sony stand. I'd love to talk to you later.
Thank you very much, Andy.